The radio crackle came at 3:47 hours, distorted and faint, cutting through the operations center like a blade through silk. Major Kestrel Vance's voice, calm as winter fog, reported 2 direct hits on her A-10 Thunderbolt II. The controller in Bagram leaned forward, coffee forgotten, because calm wasn't normal. Panic was normal. Screaming was normal. This measured tone, clinical and detached, was the sound of someone who'd already accepted what came next. The sky above Helmand Province was black, moonless, the kind of dark that swallowed everything except the faint glow of tracer fire. Somewhere in that void, a $30 million aircraft was dying, and the woman flying it spoke like she was ordering lunch. The controller keyed his mic, asked for confirmation, and received only static. Then 3 words, "Still mission capable." The line went dead. Every pilot in the ready room stopped moving. Still mission capable. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, impossible and defiant, because A-10s didn't take 2 direct hits and keep flying. They were tough, sure, built like flying tanks with titanium bathtubs protecting the cockpit, but everyone knew the limits. Everyone except, apparently, Kestrel Vance. 30 miles south, embedded with a Marine Rifle Company pinned down by insurgent fire, Staff Sergeant Dominic Rourke pressed himself into the dirt and listened to the sky tear apart. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon made a sound like God ripping canvas, 7-barrel rotary, Fury spitting 30mm rounds at 70 per second. The insurgent positions dissolved into dust and silence. Rourke didn't know who was flying close air support, didn't care, because whoever it was had just saved 23 lives. He'd learn the name later. Everyone would. The controller at Bagram tried raising Vance again. Nothing. He pulled up her file on the system, scanned the basics. 14 years in service. 3 combat deployments. Instructor pilot before getting back on the line. Call sign, Ironside. The nickname had been a joke once, back in flight school, bestowed by classmates who thought she was too rigid, too by the book. She'd kept it anyway, wore it like armor. Now it seemed prophetic. Because somewhere in the darkness, Ironside was flying a crippled beast home, and nobody knew if she'd make it. The night dragged. Dawn crept over the Hindu Kush Mountains, pale and tentative, illuminating the valleys in shades of amber and gray. The controller watched his radar screen, waiting for a blip that might never come. Other aircraft had cycled through, refueled, returned to base. Still nothing from Ironside. Protocol said to assume the worst after communication loss exceeding 30 minutes. It had been 4 hours. He kept the frequency open anyway, hopping against procedure, against logic. Then at 7:12, a speck appeared on the horizon. The tower scrambled, binoculars raised, and what they saw defied comprehension. An A-10 Thunderbolt II approaching on final, trailing smoke like a funeral shroud. But it was the wing that stopped hearts. The starboard side shredded from root to tip, more absence than aircraft. The aileron hung by cables. The engine nacelle was scorched black, metal petals peeled back like a macabre flower. And still it flew. The landing gear deployed, 3 green lights confirming what shouldn't be possible. The controller's voice cracked when he cleared her to land. Ironside Tower, you're cleared on 2-8. Emergency crews standing by. Silence. Then steady as stone. Copy. Ironside on final. She greased the landing. Textbook. The A-10 touched down gentle as a prayer, rolled 2,000 feet and stopped. Foam trucks surrounded it immediately, but Vance didn't pop the canopy. Not yet. She sat in the cockpit, gloved hands still on the throttle and stick, breathing, just breathing. Maintenance crews approached cautiously like they were inspecting a ghost. The starboard wing had taken a surface-to-air missile fragment, ripped through hydraulic lines, fuel cells, control surfaces. The empennage showed shrapnel scoring deep enough to see internal structure. A second hit had punctured the left engine, fragments embedding in the gearbox. By every engineering principle, this aircraft should have dropped from the sky like a stone. But Kestrel Vance had flown it home. She finally opened the canopy, unstrapped, and climbed down. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the cold. She walked around the aircraft once slowly, touching the damaged wing like saying goodbye to a wounded friend. A photographer caught the moment, that single image of a pilot dwarfed by her dying machine. It would circulate for years, but right then in that moment only one person spoke. Master Sergeant Cole Travers, 20-year veteran crew chief, approached with reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like this." Vance looked at him, then back at the A-10. She wanted to come home. Travers understood. It wasn't the machine. It was the will behind the controls. The debriefing happened 3 hours later after medical cleared her despite protests. The flight surgeon wanted her grounded for observation. She refused. The operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale, sat across the table with a recorder and skepticism. Hale was old school, Vietnam-era mustache and a belief that modern pilots relied too much on technology. He'd heard the reports, seen the photographs, and still didn't quite believe. Vance recounted the mission with clinical precision. The target coordinates, the ingress route, the initial anti-aircraft fire. She'd been supporting the Marines when the first hit came, hydraulic failure immediate and catastrophic. She'd compensated with manual reversion, flying the aircraft like a student pilot again, every movement deliberate and exhausting. The second hit came during egress, engine explosion lighting up her 6 o'clock. She'd shut down the left engine, balance thrust with the right, and nursed the wounded bird home at minimum controllable airspeed. Hale interrupted once. "Why didn't you eject?" Vance met his eyes. "And leave the Marines without air support?" The room went quiet. Because that was the answer, simple and complete. She could have punched out, let the aircraft crater into some nameless valley, and nobody would have blamed her. But the Marines were still taking fire. The mission wasn't complete, so she'd stayed. Hale closed his notebook, leaned back. "You're grounded pending investigation." Vance expected that. She nodded. "Understood, sir." But grounded didn't mean forgotten. Word spread through Bagram like wildfire. Pilots from other squadrons found reasons to walk past the maintenance hangar where Ironside's A-10 sat, cordoned off for investigation. They stared at the wing, the blackened engine, trying to reverse engineer how someone had flown this wreck. Theories abounded. Some credited the A-10's legendary toughness. Others pointed to Vance's experience, her instructor background giving her skills most combat pilots never developed. A few, the younger ones, whispered about luck. The older pilots shut that down fast. Luck didn't grease a landing with asymmetric thrust and no hydraulics. Skill did that. Skill and something harder to quantify, something that lived in the space between training and instinct. Staff Sergeant Rourke, the Marine she'd saved, got the story secondhand in the Chow Hall. He learned Ironside was grounded, learned about the damage, the impossible flight home. He set down his tray and walked straight to the operations center, asked to speak with Major Vance. They told him she wasn't available. He waited 4 hours. When she finally emerged, he snapped a salute so sharp it could cut. "Ma'am Rourke, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, I'm alive because of you." Vance returned the salute, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You're alive because you kept your head down and fought smart, Sergeant." Rourke shook his head. "With respect, ma'am, we were about to get overrun. You bought us time." She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the weight of 23 lives saved at the cost of an aircraft she'd loved and nearly died in. The investigation took 6 days. Accident boards moved slowly, methodically, because careers lived or died on their findings. They interviewed Vance 3 more times, cross-referenced her account with maintenance records, radar data, communications logs. They brought in engineers from Fairchild Republic, the company that built the A-10, to examine the wreckage. Those engineers spent 2 days in the hangar, measuring, photographing, shaking their heads. The lead engineer, a civilian named Theodore Gant with 40 years in aerospace, delivered his report to the board with visible emotion. The aircraft had sustained damage equivalent to a combat loss. The hydraulic system was 70% compromised. The flight control surfaces were operating on mechanical backup and willpower. The engine damage alone should have caused catastrophic failure. And yet, Gant paused during his testimony, adjusted his glasses. "Gentlemen, I helped design this aircraft. I know its limits." Major Vance exceeded every single one. The board chair, a humorless colonel named Patricia Whitmore, asked the critical question. Could any pilot have accomplished this? Gant considered. Any pilot with Major Vance's experience, composure, and frankly, courage, perhaps, but there aren't many of those. The board cleared Vance of any wrongdoing, commended her airmanship, and recommended her for the Distinguished Flying Cross. She returned to flight status the next morning. Her squadron mates greeted her with muted respect, the kind that came after someone had touched the void and returned. But Vance felt the distance. She always did. Kestrel Vance had grown up in the Appalachian foothills, coal country, where the sky was a thing you left behind to find work underground. Her father had been a miner, her mother a nurse. Neither understood when their daughter joined the Air Force, chose to fly instead of settling into the predictable rhythms of small-town life. But they'd supported her anyway, sent letters during basic training, showed up to her commissioning ceremony in their Sunday best. Her father died during her second deployment, black lung taking what the mines had started. She'd gotten emergency leave, flew home for the funeral, stood graveside in her dress blues while the pastor spoke about dust and resurrection. She'd returned to Afghanistan 3 days later, climbed back into the cockpit, and never spoke about it. The sky became her church. The A-10 became her confessional. Every mission, every sortie was a prayer written in contrails and cannon fire. Her squadron mates noticed she never talked about home, never joined the after-hours gatherings where pilots drank and swapped stories. They assumed she was cold, disconnected. The truth was simpler and harder. She felt most alive at 20,000 feet where the air was thin and the world below made sense through the targeting pod. Ground life with its messy emotions and unpredictable people exhausted her, so she flew. And when she couldn't fly, she studied. Tactics, procedures, threat envelopes. She became the pilot others consulted before difficult missions, the one who'd memorized not just the manual, but the margins between life and death. The call sign Ironside had stuck because of an incident in flight school. During a formation exercise, her wingman had panicked during turbulence, nearly collided with her. She'd calmly corrected, repositioned, completed the exercise. The instructor, debriefing afterward, had asked how she'd stayed so composed. She'd shrugged. Panic doesn't help. One of her classmates, a cocky fighter pilot named Wyatt Kress, had laughed. "You're like Ironside armor, Vance, nothing gets through." The name stuck. Kress had washed out 3 months later, failed his Czech ride, blamed everyone but himself. Vance had graduated top of her class, chosen the A-10 despite pressure to fly fighters. Fast jets were prestigious. The A-10 was a workhorse, ugly and slow and beloved by the ground troops it protected. She didn't care about prestige. She cared about purpose. Close air support meant saving lives directly, watching Marines and soldiers walk away from battles they should have lost. That mattered more than speed records or air-to-air kills. Her first combat deployment to Iraq in the early years had been a baptism in dust and fire. She'd learned how to read terrain from altitude, identify friend from foe in seconds, deliver ordnance with surgical precision. She'd also learned how to carry the weight of mistakes. On her 19th mission, she'd authorized a strike on a building flagged as hostile. It had been a wedding. Bad intelligence. 16 civilians dead. The investigation cleared her, confirmed she'd followed protocol, acted on solid information. But the dead didn't care about protocol. She carried their names in a small notebook she kept in her flight suit pocket. 16 names she'd never met, written in careful script. She read them before every mission, a ritual of remembrance and penance. Her squadron commander at the time, a crusty colonel named Dalton Pierce, had found her one night in the hangar, reading the notebook by work light. He'd sat down beside her, said nothing for 10 minutes. Then, "You'll destroy yourself if you carry this forever." She'd looked at him. "How do you let it go?" Pierce had sighed. "You don't, you just keep flying, you save more than you lose, and eventually the scales balance." She'd never believed that. Math didn't work on souls, but she kept flying anyway because quitting felt like surrender. Over time, the missions blurred together. Close air support in Fallujah, interdiction runs in Kandahar, counterinsurgency in Somalia. Different countries, same job. She became known as reliable, steady, the pilot you wanted overhead when everything went wrong. Her personnel file filled with commendations, awards, promotion recommendations. She accepted them with the same detached calm she brought to everything. The military loved competence, rewarded it with paperwork and ceremonies. What they didn't see was the cost. Every mission chipped away at something internal, something she couldn't name. By her third deployment, she'd stopped dreaming. Not nightmares, she'd learned to manage those, but dreams entirely. She'd close her eyes and find only darkness, wake 6 hours later as if no time had passed. The Marines from that night in Helmand Province started a tradition. Every year on the anniversary, they'd send Vance a unit coin, a token of gratitude. She kept them in a drawer, never looked at them. Gratitude felt strange, unearned, because she'd only done her job. But to those Marines, she was legend. They told the story to new recruits, embellished it over time until it became myth. The pilot who'd flown a dead plane through hell. The woman who'd turned back the darkness with cannon fire and will. Rourke, promoted to gunnery sergeant, made sure the story never died. He'd speak at NCO academies, leadership courses, anywhere they'd let him. He described that night the fear, the certainty they were finished. Then the sound from above, mechanical thunder, and the insurgents gone like smoke. That pilot saved us, he'd say, and then she saved herself. That's what leadership looks like. Vance never heard these speeches. She'd returned to the grind, the endless cycle of training, missions, debriefs. The Distinguished Flying Cross came with a ceremony she endured, standing at attention while a general pinned medal to her chest and praised her courage. She'd thanked him, saluted, walked away. The medal joined the coins in the drawer. What she wanted wasn't recognition. It was understanding. Someone who saw past the call sign and the legend, who recognized the exhaustion beneath. That someone arrived in the form of Captain Alara Stone, a new pilot assigned to the squadron fresh from training. Stone was young, eager, everything Vance had once been before the edges wore smooth. She asked questions constantly, studied every detail, approached flying with infectious enthusiasm. The other pilots found her exhausting. Vance found her familiar. During a routine training flight, Stone's aircraft developed a mechanical issue, minor but concerning. Vance, flying wing, talked her through the emergency checklist, guided her back to base. After landing, Stone sought her out. "Thank you, ma'am, I would have panicked." Vance shook her head. "You didn't panic, you followed procedure, that's the job," Stone smiled. "The job and having someone like you on the radio." They started flying together more often. Vance didn't intend to mentor Stone, didn't want the responsibility, but it happened anyway. Stone asked about tactics, about decision-making under pressure, about how to balance aggression with caution. Vance answered honestly, shared lessons learned in blood and fire. She also shared the notebook. Stone read the 16 names, looked up with understanding rather than pity. "You remember them?" Vance nodded. "Always." Stone handed back the notebook. "That's why you're a good pilot, ma'am. You never forget the cost." It was the first time anyone had said that without trying to fix her. The squadron deployed again 7 months later, back to Afghanistan, same dusty bases and endless mountains. The war had dragged on so long that veterans like Vance were now rarities, outnumbered by new pilots who'd grown up watching the conflict on television. She didn't judge them. Everyone started somewhere. But she noticed the difference. They flew with confidence that bordered on arrogance, hadn't yet learned that the sky could kill you as easily as the enemy. Stone deployed with them, eager to prove herself. Vance watched her carefully, saw echoes of her younger self in Stone's determination. She pulled her aside before the first mission. "Stay focused, stay humble. The mission matters more than glory," Stone nodded. "I understand, ma'am." Vance hoped she did. The first week was routine. Patrols, reconnaissance, the occasional show of force. Then intelligence flagged a high-value target, Taliban commander responsible for a series of IED attacks. The compound was nestled in a valley, surrounded by steep terrain and limited approach vectors. 2 A-10s would provide close air support while ground forces moved in. Vance led the flight. Stone flew wing. The mission brief was straightforward, but Vance felt unease coiling in her gut. The terrain was bad, the intelligence was thin, and the weather forecast showed deteriorating conditions. She voiced her concerns. The operations officer dismissed them. "We have a narrow window. Execute the mission." They launched at dawn, climbing into a sky bruised purple and gray. Stone's voice came through the radio, excited and nervous. "Ironside Falcon 2, weather looks rough." Vance scanned the horizon. Copy, stay tight, we'll reassess at the target. The valley appeared below them like a scar in the earth, narrow and shadowed. Vance descended first, eyes scanning for threats, anti-aircraft positions, possible SAM sites. The intelligence packet had listed the compound as lightly defended. She didn't trust it. The ground forces called in reported taking fire. Vance armed her cannon, began her attack run. The GAU-8 roared, chewing through mud walls and defensive positions. She pulled up, banked hard, checked her 6. Stone followed, executed her run with textbook precision. The ground forces advanced. For 5 minutes everything went according to plan. Then the sky erupted. A surface-to-air missile streaked up from a concealed position, proximity fuse detonating near Stone's aircraft. Vance saw the flash, heard Stone's grunt over the radio. "Falcon 2 hit, I'm hit." The calm in Stone's voice was wrong, too controlled. Vance knew that tone, she'd used it herself. She rolled, came around, searched for Stone's aircraft, found it trailing smoke, losing altitude. "Falcon 2 status." Stone's response was clipped. "Hydraulics failing, engine temperature critical." The terrain below was unforgiving, no clear landing zones. If Stone ejected, she'd be in enemy territory with ground forces too far away to extract quickly. Vance made the decision in seconds. "Falcon 2, stay with me, we're going home." The operations center monitoring the frequency interrupted. "Ironside advised Falcon 2 to eject. Ground extraction will be coordinated." Vance ignored them. She pulled alongside Stone's crippled A-10, assessed the damage. The right engine was dead, smoke pouring from the nacelle. The vertical stabilizer showed shrapnel damage. Hydraulic fluid leaked in a thin vapor trail. It was bad, but not impossible. Not yet. "Falcon 2, throttle back. We're going to climb out of this valley slowly. Follow my lead." Stone's voice wavered. "I don't know if I can." "You can." Vance's tone left no room for doubt. "You've trained for this. Stick with me." They began the climb, 2 wounded aircraft clawing for altitude. Vance adjusted her position constantly, providing visual reference, talking Stone through every correction. The valley walls rose around them, threatening, but she focused only on the next 100 feet, then the next. The operations center kept calling, demanding status, threatening to order an ejection. Vance switched frequencies, cut them off. This was between her and Stone now. The weather closed in, clouds swallowing the peaks. Visibility dropped. Vance flew on instruments and instinct, trusting her internal map of the terrain. Stone followed, silent except for her labored breathing. They cleared the valley after 15 minutes that felt like hours. Open sky ahead. Vance allowed herself one breath of relief. "Falcon 2, how's your fuel?" Stone checked her gauges. 20 minutes, maybe." Bagram was 30 minutes away at normal speed, with Stone's damaged aircraft 45. The math didn't work. Vance scanned her mental map, calculated alternatives. Forward operating base Salerno was closer, 15 minutes. Shorter runway, limited emergency equipment, but possible. Change of plans, we're diverting to Salerno. Stone acknowledged, voice steadier now. The miles passed in tense silence. Vance monitored Stone's aircraft constantly, ready to react if something failed catastrophically. But Stone held it together, fought the damaged controls with grim determination. Salerno appeared ahead, a brown scar of runway in the wilderness. Vance called the tower, declared the emergency. They rolled out the crashed trucks, cleared the airspace. "Falcon 2, you're going to land first. I'll talk you through it." Stone's fear bled through. "What if I can't?" "Then we try again, but you'll make it on the first pass." Vance kept her voice steady, confident, the same tone she'd heard from instructors years ago when she'd been the terrified student. Stone entered the pattern, descended, hands white-knuckled on the stick. The damaged A-10 wobbled, yawed, threatened to depart controlled flight. "Easy, small corrections, you're doing fine." Stone fought for every inch of altitude, every degree of heading. The runway rose to meet her. At the last second, the aircraft dipped left, unstable. Vance's heart stopped. But Stone corrected, muscle memory overriding fear. The wheels touched down hard but solid. The aircraft rolled, slowed, stopped. Stone sat in the cockpit, shaking. Vance landed behind her, taxied close, shut down her engine. She climbed out, walked to Stone's aircraft. Stone popped the canopy, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was dead." Vance reached up, gripped her hand. "But you're not. You flew it home." Stone climbed down, legs unsteady. She looked at the damage, at the scorched engine and torn metal, and something shifted in her expression. Understanding, maybe. The weight of survival. Vance knew that look. She'd worn it herself, standing beside her own crippled aircraft years ago. The maintenance crews swarmed Stone's plane, inspected the damage, shook their heads in disbelief. Another impossible flight. Another pilot who'd refused to quit. The story would spread. Ironside had saved another one, but Vance didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. Later in the debriefing, Stone was quiet, answering questions mechanically. The board praised her airmanship, her composure under fire. She accepted it with numb gratitude. Afterward, she found Vance outside the operations building, staring at the mountains. "Why didn't you let me eject?" Vance considered the question. "Because you could make it, and because leaving someone behind feels wrong." Stone nodded slowly. "I thought I was ready for combat. I wasn't. Nobody is. You just learn to live with it." The missions continued. Vance flew, returned, repeated. Stone recovered, returned to flight status, became more cautious and more capable. The squadron cycled through deployments, lost aircraft to maintenance and occasionally combat, gained new pilots who heard the stories and looked at Vance with reverence she didn't want. She became a fixture, the veteran pilot who'd seen everything, survived everything. Her promotion stalled because she refused staff positions, chose to stay on the line. Command tolerated it because she was valuable, because younger pilots learned by flying with her. But tolerance had limits. Lieutenant Colonel Hale called her into his office midway through the deployment. "Kestrel, you're overdue for a staff assignment. I'm recommending you for Pentagon liaison." Vance felt the walls close in. A desk job, meetings and paperwork and politics, everything she'd avoided. "Sir, I'd prefer to remain operational," Hale sighed. "You can't fly forever. At some point you have to think about your career." "My career is flying." He leaned back, studied her. "Is it? Or is it running away from something?" The question hit harder than she wanted to admit. She left his office without answering, walked to the flight line, stood beside her assigned aircraft. The A-10 was ugly, brutish, covered in patches and carbon scoring from 100 battles. It was also the only thing in her life that made sense. Stone found her there an hour later. "Ma'am, are they pulling you off the line?" Word traveled fast. Vance nodded. "Probably." Stone's frustration was immediate. "That's insane. You're the best pilot in the squadron." "I'm old, Captain. They need to make room for you young guns." Stone shook her head. "We need you. I need you." The admission was raw, honest. Vance felt something crack inside, some wall she'd maintained for years. "You'll be fine without me. You've already proven that." They stood in silence, watching the sun descend behind the mountains, painting the sky in violent reds and oranges. Finally, Stone spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" Vance hesitated. "Go ahead. Why do you keep flying? After everything, why not take the staff job, the promotion, the easier life?" Vance had asked herself that question countless times, never found a satisfying answer. But standing there with the wind carrying the smell of jet fuel and dust, she tried. "'Cause up there the mission is clear. You protect people, you bring everyone home. Down here nothing's clear, nothing's simple." Stone considered that. "So it's not about flying, it's about purpose." Vance smiled, sad and knowing. Maybe it always was. The conversation ended when the alert klaxon sounded, calling them back to the ready room. Another mission, another night in the sky. They ran together, side by side, and for a moment Vance felt something she hadn't in years. Not quite hope, but close. The Pentagon assignment came through 2 weeks later, effective immediately. Vance's final flight was a routine patrol, nothing dramatic, just hours of circling above empty terrain. She took her time, savored every moment, the feel of the stick in her hand, the rumble of the engines, the vast silence at altitude where the world's chaos couldn't reach. Stone flew wing, didn't speak much, understood that some things required quiet. When they landed, the squadron was waiting. Someone had organized a send-off, informal but heartfelt. Pilots lined the taxiway, saluting as Vance shut down her aircraft for the last time. She climbed out slowly, looked at the faces around her. Some she'd trained, some she'd saved. All of them had stories that intersected with hers in ways she'd never fully understand. Master Sergeant Travers approached with a gift, a piece of the wing from her damaged A-10, mounted on a plaque. "Figured you'd want something to remember her by, ma'am." Vance accepted it, ran her fingers over the torn metal. "Thank you, Sergeant." The reception afterward was awkward. She'd never been good at social events, didn't know how to accept praise gracefully. Pilots shared stories, embellished her exploits, made her sound larger than life. She listened, uncomfortable, waiting for it to end. Finally, Stone rescued her, pulled her aside. "You okay?" Vance shrugged. "This isn't me." "I know," Stone smiled. "But let them have this. You're a legend whether you like it or not." Vance looked around the room at the young faces full of admiration and hope. She'd been that young once before the weight accumulated. "I don't feel like a legend. I feel like someone who just kept showing up." Stone nodded. "That's what makes you one." They stood together watching the party, and Vance allowed herself to feel something other than exhaustion. Pride, maybe. Or just the quiet satisfaction of a job finished. She left Afghanistan the next morning, cargo flight packed with rotating personnel. She looked out the window as the base disappeared below, watched the mountains recede into haze. Somewhere down there, Marines were patrolling, pilots were flying. The war continued without her. It felt wrong and inevitable. The Pentagon was everything she'd feared. Sterile offices, endless meetings, discussions about budgets and policies that felt disconnected from the realities she'd lived. She wore her uniform, attended briefings, spoke when asked about operational experience. But part of her remained in the cockpit, 30,000 feet above some nameless valley. She found herself walking to the Pentagon's observation area during lunch, watching aircraft take off from nearby Reagan National. The civilian planes looked delicate, fragile compared to the A-10's brutal functionality. She missed the weight of the stick, the clarity of purpose. Months passed. She received updates from the squadron. Stone had been promoted, was leading flights now, applying lessons learned. Other pilots rotated through, some she'd trained, carrying forward the traditions and tactics she'd helped develop. The war in Afghanistan wound toward its chaotic end, years of effort collapsing in weeks. She watched the news with hollow anger, saw the desperate evacuation, the faces of people who trusted American promises. She thought about the Marines she'd saved, wondered if it had mattered. One evening her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Major Vance. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Yes. This is Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, ma'am, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. We met years ago," she remembered. The Marine from that night, the one who'd saluted so sharply. "Sergeant Rourke, what can I do for you?" There was a pause. "I'm retiring, ma'am, 22 years, and I wanted you to know that every Marine who was there that night made it home from the war. All 23 of us, because of you." The words hit unexpectedly hard. She'd saved them that night but hadn't known what came after. Knowing they'd survived, completed their service, returned to families, it meant something. "I'm glad, Sergeant," Rourke continued. "We're having a reunion, ma'am, Virginia, 3 months from now. We'd be honored if you'd attend." She wanted to refuse, couldn't imagine facing them all, accepting their gratitude. But something in Rourke's voice stopped her. This mattered to them, and maybe she realized it mattered to her too. "I'll be there." The reunion took place at a VFW hall outside Richmond, modest space decorated with American flags and unit memorabilia. Vance arrived early, uncomfortable in civilian clothes, unsure what to expect. Rourke met her at the door, older now but still carrying himself with military bearing. "Ma'am, thank you for coming." He led her inside. The Marines were scattered around, some in uniform, most in casual clothes. Families present, children running between tables. Normal life earned through survival. Rourke called for attention, introduced her. "Everyone, this is Major Kestrel Vance, call sign Ironside, the pilot who saved our lives." The room erupted in applause. Vance stood frozen, overwhelmed. They approached one by one, shaking her hand, sharing what had happened after that night. Sergeant Collins had become a teacher. Corporal Martinez ran a construction company. Lance Corporal Yun was in nursing school. Each story a thread extending from that moment when cannon fire had held back the dark. One Marine, a quiet man named Webb, approached last. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something. That night I was ready to give up. I was injured, figured that was it. Then I heard your aircraft, and I knew someone was fighting for us. That changed everything." Vance didn't know what to say. She'd thought of that mission as one among hundreds, significant only for the damage sustained. But to these men, it was the night that determined everything. The evening stretched on. She listened to their stories, met their families, held children who existed because their fathers had survived. She saw the ripple effects of that single night, the lives built on a foundation of seconds and decisions. Later, sitting outside with Rourke watching the sunset, she spoke quietly. I carried guilt for so long, people I couldn't save, missions that went wrong. I never thought about the ones who made it. Rourke nodded. That's the burden, ma'am. We remember the fallen. But the saved matter too. She looked at him. Do you still think about that night? Every day, but not with fear anymore, with gratitude. Vance felt something shift inside, some weight she'd carried for years loosening its grip. She'd spent so long focused on the cost, she'd forgotten to count the victories. That night, driving back to her apartment, she passed Reagan National. Aircraft descended in steady streams, navigation lights blinking against the dark. She pulled over, watched them land, and for the first time in years she felt at peace. Not because the pain had vanished, but because she finally understood what the flight surgeon had tried to tell her long ago. You couldn't carry the dead and the living with equal weight. The living needed you to acknowledge their survival, to recognize that some nights ended with dawn instead of darkness. The Pentagon assignment lasted another year. She completed her obligations, attended the ceremonies, played the role. But she also started speaking at military academies, sharing lessons learned not from a place of superiority but honest reflection. She talked about fear and decision-making, about the gap between training and reality. She showed them the notebook with 16 names, explained why she carried it, not as penance but as reminder. Every mission had consequences. Every choice rippled outward. Competence wasn't enough. You needed conscience too. Stone visited during a temporary duty assignment, met